A group of men, armed with rifles and pitchforks, push through a wheat field, praying they're not too late to save two missing children. Far away, an elderly man named Paul Edgecombe wakes up in his nursing home room. Despite his age, Paul is still sharp and self-reliant. After washing up, he asks the staff for nothing more than
just 2 pieces of dry toast extra, thanks.
One of the orderlies quickly guesses Paul is planning to sneak away for a hike in the mountains, something strictly against the rules. But instead of reporting him, the young man simply warns him to be careful. Later, Paul does exactly what was suspected. He heads out alone and finds his way to a forgotten cabin deep in the woods. Hours later, back at the home, everyone gathers to watch a classic movie on TV. As Paul sits among them, the film stirs something inside him. A rush of memories crashes down and tears run down his face. His old friend Elaine notices and gently comforts him. She reminds him how sometimes the past has a way of hitting us without warning. What no one around him knows is that Paul carries memories of events so extraordinary, so impossible to explain, that they've haunted him for more than 60 years. Memories of the time he served as head guard on death row, the place they called the Green Mile. 60 years earlier, Paul worked as a guard during the Great Depression, a time when jobs were scarce and every paycheck mattered. He wasn't just any guard. He was in charge of death row, a block of cells that led straight to the electric chair. The prisoners called it the last mile, but to the staff, it was known as the Green Mile because of the pale green floor that stretched all the way to the execution room. The chair itself had a name too. They called it Old Sparky, and for good reason. Many men had taken their final steps across those tiles, ending their lives in that very seat. The year Paul remembered most was 1935. That was when he was battling a painful bladder infection, something that left him exhausted and irritable. His fellow guards, Brutal and Dean, urged him to take time off, maybe even see a doctor.
You should have took today.
But Paul refused. He couldn't afford to miss work. A new prisoner was arriving, and he needed to be there. Soon, a prison van rolled up to the gates. Rookie guard Percy, along with veteran officer Harry, stepped out escorting the new inmate. What caught everyone off guard was the man himself. He was enormous, so tall and broad that even Brutal, who was considered a giant among the guards, suddenly looked small beside him. Percy, however, wasn't impressive at all. Short-tempered, arrogant, and eager to throw his weight around, he had a way of making the whole team dislike him. Paul walked up to greet the barefoot giant, asking calmly if he planned to cause any trouble.
I'm not going to have any trouble.
The man looked like he could rip through the entire staff without breaking a sweat. But instead of aggression, he only showed fear. Nervous, quiet, and almost childlike, he softly addressed Paul as boss and walked into his cell without resistance. Paul ordered Percy to leave the block, but as usual, the rookie pushed back until the other guards shouted him down. The awkward moment didn't go unnoticed. One of the inmates, Dell, chuckled at Percy's embarrassment, and Percy snapped, grabbing his baton and breaking Dell's fingers in anger. Only after Percy stormed out did Paul order the shackles removed from the new prisoner. That's when everyone realized something important. The giant wasn't just quiet, he was slow, simple-minded, almost childlike. Struggling to even spell his own name, he introduced himself as John Coffey. Like the drink, he explained softly, only not spelled the same. Then, almost shyly, he asked if the light stayed on at night. It turned out that, despite his size, he was terrified of the dark. Before lying down, Coffey extended his massive hand toward Paul, asking quietly if he could shake it. The guards tensed, worried he might crush him, but Paul sensed no danger. He let Coffey take his hand, and for a brief moment, something passed between them, something Paul couldn't quite explain. And then Coffey said something strange, almost to himself.
Boss, I tried to take it back.
Not long after Coffey's arrival, Paul asked to see his file. The crime described inside was horrifying. 2 little girls had been taken from their home in a small town. When the villagers caught up, they found John Coffey sitting on the riverbank, holding the torn bodies of the sisters. He was screaming, crying as if he had just realized what he had done. Their father nearly killed him on the spot before the others pulled him back. The official report left Paul shaken. He couldn't make sense of it. How could a man who seemed so gentle commit something so brutal? Life on the mile went on, and with it came small moments that unsettled the guards. One day, a mouse appeared in the corridor, completely fearless. Instead of scurrying away, It strolled right into the block. Brutal tossed it some food, and the little creature ran straight into the storage room used for violent inmates, now piled high with junk. The guards tore the room apart searching, but the mouse vanished. Moments later, it reappeared as if nothing had happened. Percy, furious, tried stomping it to death, but the animal slipped away again. The other guards couldn't help laughing as Percy wasted hours throwing boxes around. Paul reminded him, and everyone else, that their job wasn't to bully or provoke. Men on death row were already fragile. Push them too far, and they might hurt themselves, or worse. But Percy never listened. He insulted the inmates, threatened the staff, and made it clear he only cared about watching an execution up close. Finally, Brutal had enough. He grabbed Percy by the throat. Paul stepped in, warning Percy that next time no one would hold back. Before the next real execution, the guards rehearsed the procedure. An old janitor volunteered to play the prisoner during the run-through. They strapped him into the mock chair, and the janitor cracked dirty jokes the whole time. The guards couldn't help but laugh. Black humor was how they stayed sane. Paul scolded them for the levity, but understood why it happened. Still, Percy watched with a sick sort of fascination. He didn't just want to see an execution, he wanted to run one. Later that evening, they shaved the top of Bitterbuck's head to improve conductivity. Paul sat with him in his cell, a quiet, human moment amid the cruelty. Bitterbuck spoke about a strange belief. If someone truly regretted their sins, they'd get to relive the happiest moment of their life after death. For him, it was a camping trip with his wife, two young lovers by the fire, talking until dawn. Paul admitted he believed it too, and for a moment, the two men sat together in fragile peace. On the day, Bitterbuck was led to Old Sparky in front of witnesses. The wet sponge that made the current flow quickly was part of the ritual. They'd practiced it with the janitor.
Hold on, Bitterbuck. Electricity should now be passed law.
When the switch was pulled, the room filled with terrible screams. The doctor checked, and a second jolt was needed. Percy couldn't help himself. He taunted the dying man with cruel words as the body was wheeled out. Afterwards, Percy told Paul he didn't want to merely watch the next one. He wanted to be the one in charge of it. The mouse returned, this time trotting straight into Dell's cell. Dell instantly adored it, naming him Mr. Jingles. To everyone's amazement, the little creature seemed smart, rolling a spool like a circus trick. Even Percy, for once, looked impressed, offering the mouse an empty cigar box for a home. By now, Paul's infection had grown unbearable. The pain left him weak, but he forced himself to keep working. But peace didn't last. Soon a new inmate was brought in, William Wharton, better known as Wild Bill. His crimes were monstrous, murder, even of a pregnant woman. Drugged for transport, he looked half asleep. But the moment he hit the mile, he snapped awake. He exploded into chaos. Wild Bill headbutted Percy, wrapped a chain around Dean's throat, and when Paul tried to intervene, he struck him hard in the groin, dropping him in agony. The block fell into chaos until Brutal arrived, knocking Wild Bill unconscious with one blow. As Paul lay doubled over in pain, he realized the fever from his infection was getting worse. Barely standing, Paul tried to hold the mile together while the others sought help. That's when Coffee called to him. In an instant, the giant reached through the bars, pulled Paul toward him, and pressed his massive hand against Paul's groin. The light bulb overhead flared and shattered. Paul struggled, terrified, until Coffee suddenly released him. The prisoner staggered back, coughing violently. From his mouth poured a cloud of black ash, drifting upward before disappearing into the air. Gasping for breath, Coffee whispered that he had taken it back. He slumped onto his bed, drained, and fell into a deep sleep. Shaken, Paul stumbled to the restroom and froze. The pain was gone, completely gone. For the first time in weeks, he felt whole again. Whatever Coffee had done, it was no trick. Paul had been healed. That night, Paul felt like a new man, reborn. He and his wife stayed close, lying in bed, wrapped in memories of their youth. For a moment, life felt lighter. The next morning, Paul took a day off and visited the lawyer who had defended John Coffey. But the meeting left him uneasy. The lawyer admitted there was no record of Coffey's past. No childhood, no family, no history at all. It was as if he had just fallen from the sky. Paul refused to believe John was violent, but the lawyer stood by the jury's verdict. He compared Coffey to a stray dog his family once adopted. Gentle at first, but one day without warning, it savagely attacked his son, blinding the boy in one eye. To the lawyer, Coffey was no different. The following day, Paul carried something special to the prison, a plate of warm cornbread baked by his wife. When he handed it to John, Coffee smiled softly and said she was very pleased, as though he had shared in her joy. John broke off pieces, passing them to Dell and even Mr. Jingles. When Wild Bill demanded some, Paul ignored him. Furious, Bill hurled insults at Coffee until Paul finally stepped in. But instead of backing down, Wild Bill spat straight into Paul's face. That was the kind of man Bill was, always provoking, always testing limits. The guards blasted him with a fire hose and locked him in the isolation cell. Bill swore he'd behave, but the very next day, he bought a pie off the janitor and hurled it into Brutus's face. Right back into the box he went. Meanwhile, Dell's execution was drawing near. With no family to see him off, the guards decided to give him a moment of happiness. They staged a performance, pretending to be circus visitors who came just to see the famous performing mouse. For a short while, Dell was overjoyed. Paul supervised Percy during the execution rehearsal. Everything ran smoothly, but afterward, Percy pulled one of his cruel tricks. He startled Dell on purpose, making him fall and hit his head. Percy laughed it off as a harmless joke, until Wild Bill reached through the bars, grabbed him, and groped him while whispering threats. Percy was shaken to the core. Morton mocked him, comparing him to a frightened little girl, while Dell laughed so hard he nearly cried. Percy was so terrified he wet himself. Burning with humiliation, he begged the others not to tell. Calmly, Paul reassured him.
What happens on a mile?
But Dell couldn't resist teasing him afterward. Finally, the day of Dell's execution arrived. He was restless, not for himself, but for Mr. Jingles. He worried about what would happen to his little friend after he was gone. Paul promised to take the mouse home, but Dell feared the woods near Paul's house would terrify him. That's when Brutus stepped in, spinning a story about Mouseville, a magical circus tent where mice lived in a city of luxury, performing tricks and entertaining crowds. Dell's eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. He believed every word. To him, Mouseville was heaven. But then, as if to shatter the moment, Mr. Jingles' spool rolled away, and the tiny mouse chased it into the corridor. In an instant, Percy slammed his boot down, crushing the little creature. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Dell screamed in despair, but John Coffey reached out calmly and urged them to hurry. Paul carefully lifted the broken little body and placed it in John's hands. Coffey leaned down and breathed into the mouse. A burst of light filled the room, and then, just like that, Mr. Jingles scurried back to Dell, alive and unhurt. The guards were stunned, unable to speak. Coffey staggered back, coughing up a cloud of dark ash. Paul and Brutus confronted Percy. Paul told him flatly that the mouse lived, and mocked him, saying Percy was as useless at killing mice as he was at everything else. Percy raged, certain it was a trick to humiliate him, but Brutus grabbed him and Paul laid it out. After Dell's execution, Percy would disappear from the mile. If not, the guards would make sure the world knew every vile thing he'd ever done. Percy, shaking, agreed. That night, Dell walked to his death with calm dignity. He placed Mr. Jingles on Paul's shoulder, asking him to care for his only friend. Since the mouse couldn't stay with Paul during the execution, Coffey held him close. Dell looked one last time at the little creature and whispered goodbye, saying he loved him. As guards lead Dell toward the chair, his heart sinks when he sees Percy smirking in the corner. In his final moments, Dell apologizes for his sins and pleads once more with Paul. Don't forget about Mr. Jingles. But then, Percy betrays him in the cruelest way possible. He sneers, blurting out the truth about Mouseville, that it was just a made-up story, nothing more than a fairy tale to keep him calm. Dell's hope is shattered. When it's time to wet the sponge, the step that ensures a quick and merciful death, Percy pretends to dip it in water. Paul notices too late. The signal is given, and the switch is pulled. The current rips through Dell's body. He convulses violently, screaming in agony as the stench of burning flesh fills the room. At the same time, in his cell, John Coffey begins to shake uncontrollably, spiritually absorbing Dell's suffering, sharing his pain. Wild Bill is delighted, laughing like a madman, while everyone else watches in horror. Paul prays for Dell's death to be quick, but it isn't. Flames rise, the audience panics, and Paul forces Percy to look at the nightmare he caused. When it's finally over, Brutus orders Percy to put out the flames. Percy has the nerve to claim he didn't know about the sponge, so Brutal slaps him across the face. Hal arrives, furious and demanding answers. But Paul knows the most important thing now is to get rid of Percy without breaking their fragile deal. He covers for him, buying time. Later, Paul checks in on John, who lies in his cell quietly crying. The giant admits he felt Dell's pain. He's exhausted. Mr. Jingles, terrified, hides in the padded cell once again. Days later, Paul and his wife visit Hal and his wife Melinda. On the surface, she seems well, but Hal admits she suffers from strange spells, cursing, screaming in ways he never imagined. That's when Paul decides to share his secret with the guards. John Coffey cured him. Paul suggests something unthinkable, sneaking John out of prison to heal Melinda. The risk is enormous. If they're caught, it's over. But Paul finally speaks his heart. He doesn't believe John is guilty. No man blessed with such a gift could be evil. Against their fears, the men agree. On the night of the plan, they knock Wild Bill out cold with heavy sedatives. With grim satisfaction, they strap Percy into a straitjacket and lock him in the padded cell, payback for what he did to Dell. Dean stays behind to protect his family if things go wrong. When John is released from his cell, he already knows something's happening, and he's overjoyed. But Wild Bill suddenly lunges at him. John panics, every light bulb shatters, and Wild Bill collapses unconscious. Outside, under the night sky, John marvels at the grass and the fresh air. He urges the men to breathe deeply with him, just savoring the moment. Then, they drive to Hal's house. Hal greets them with a shotgun, but John walks forward calmly, guided by something greater. Sensing no danger, Hal lets them in. John sits by Melinda's bed. She sees his scars, the marks of a lifetime of pain. He leans close, presses his lips gently to hers, and suddenly the entire house trembles. Lights blaze, clocks stop. John pulls the sickness into himself, choking on her tumor. But this time, he doesn't release it. When it's over, Melinda opens her eyes, as if waking from a dream. She feels whole again. She greets John as though meeting him for the first time, even giving him a pendant of Saint Strewn, Christopher, the saint who carried the burdens of others. But John is left weak, almost broken. They carry him back to the prison, lay him in bed. He carried more than exhaustion. He carried knowledge. The moment Wild Bill had touched him earlier, Coffey had seen the truth. Late that night, as Percy was released from the padded cell, Coffey suddenly grabbed him by the throat. Before the others could react, he exhaled a cloud of dark ash straight into Percy's body. The guards froze, not sure what to do. Percy stood still, eyes empty, moving like a man under a spell. Then, without warning, he pulled his revolver and emptied all 6 bullets into Wild Bill. The crazed inmate collapsed instantly, dead where he stood. Another cloud of ash rose from Percy's mouth, and he collapsed to the floor. When Paul rushed to Coffey's side, the giant whispered that he had punished evil, that he had punished them both. He wanted Paul to see why. Their hands touched, and Paul was thrown into Coffey's vision. He saw what had really happened to the little girls. It wasn't Coffey. It was Wild Bill. The same man who had caused chaos on the mile had also tricked and murdered those innocent children. He lured them into the woods, threatening one if the other screamed. Their love for each other kept them silent, and it became their doom. The truth shattered Paul. Coffey wasn't guilty. He wasn't a killer. He was a man cursed with a gift that forced him to feel the world's pain every single day. And now, after everything, Coffey confessed he was tired. Tired of carrying so much suffering. Tired of living in a world so cruel. Not long after, Percy is sent to a mental hospital, but Paul now faces the unbearable truth. John Coffey is a good man, an innocent man, the last soul on earth who should die in the chair. Paul asks him what he wants. John simply says he's ready. He's tired. Death will be a relief. His only wishes are simple: sweet cornbread and to see a movie before he dies. The guards grant him both. John watches Top Hat, whispering in awe that the dancers look like angels. Finally, the day comes. Paul removes the pendant from his neck, promising to return it. John smiles and tells them of a dream, Mouseville, where Mr. Jingles performs tricks for 2 little girls, alive and happy. When they bring him into the chamber, the crowd seethes with hate. Paul steadies him, reminding John to focus on the guards who care for him. Tears stream down Brutal's face. Paul reads the sentence, but when the hood is lowered, John pleads. He's afraid of the dark. Paul honors his wish, leaving it off. The sponge is soaked this time. The switch is pulled. John dies swiftly, without screams. Only silence, only tears. That was the last execution Paul ever oversaw. Afterward, he transferred to a juvenile facility with Brutal, trying to guide young lives onto better paths. But Paul carried the weight of what had happened for the rest of his life. Back in the present, Paul finishes telling his story to Elaine. She struggles to believe it. After all, Paul looks far younger than his true age. To prove it, he takes her into the woods, to an old cabin where a small cigar box waits. Inside lives, Jingles, the same little mouse from the mile, impossibly alive decades later. Paul reveals the truth. When coffee healed him, he passed on a piece of his gift. That's why Paul is still alive at 108 years old, long past the time when everyone he loved has already gone. And that's where we'll leave this chapter of The Green Mile. What did you think about John Coffey's powers and Dell's heartbreaking farewell? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful movie stories, and share this with a friend who loves great cinema. Until next time, stay tuned for more unforgettable stories.